This episode of New Politics was released on the 27th of March, 2026, and produced on the lands of the Wangal and Gadigal people.
The Liberal Party has collapsed in South Australia, but is this a temporary setback or more splintering of the centre-right? If One Nation and the Liberal Party keep fighting over the same votes, are they locking themselves out of government forever? The Labor Party did win the South Australian election, but it provides more evidence of the demise of the Liberal Party, and there's still some more pain to come. I'm Eddie Djokovic.
I'm David Lewis. All of this is coming up in this big episode of New Politics.
And just a reminder that New Politics is produced by independent media. We publish extended analysis each and every week. And if you value independent journalism without the influence of corporate backing, join us at newpolitics.com.au and support us directly. It's just $5 per month. You can also join up at Substack and Patreon, and all of this is a good way to support independent journalism.
Peter Malinauskas leading Labor to a historic win, turning more seats red than ever before.
It's very important that no one confuses tonight's result as adulation. Instead, we should see it as only being an invitation to continue to work our guts out for the next 4 years.
But for the first time, there's a flash of orange in the Red Sea of Parliament. Pauline Hanson's One Nation party achieving its best result anywhere in Australia for decades, and the country is on notice.
The South Australian election was held last weekend and it all went according to plan. The Labor government was returned to office with a massive majority. The Liberal Party was reduced to a minor party and was outpolled by One Nation. And if you'd been following all the headlines from the mainstream media, you could have been mistaken into thinking that One Nation had actually won the election. There was a talk of a massive surge, that there's been an earthquake in the electorate, a seismic shift. And aside from acknowledging that the Labor Party won the election and that Premier Peter Malinauskas had been returned, there wasn't too much noise about this victory. Now, David, there's no question that there are some big stories to come out of this election. The massive loss of votes and seats by the Liberal Party, they'll probably end up with around 6 seats or so. That's still not great. But another big story is One Nation receiving 22% of the primary vote. That's big news. But the even bigger story, I think, is that even after all the focus on One Nation from the media before the election, during the election and after the election, even after all of that, and even after they won 22% of the primary vote, on the night of the election, they only won the 1 seat. So that's 1 seat out of 47 seats. They might end up with 1 other seat as well. But if you go into an election and you come out of it winning just 1 or 2 seats, well, that's not really such a great result, is it?
And the first thing that we've got to unpack here, it's not a phrase I love, but here we are, is that it is a preferential system. And so the primary vote isn't necessarily the big thing to focus on, except, you're right, when 22% of people say we want this party, in a 47-seat parliament, you're looking at about 8 seats, 7 or 8 seats, which is more than the Liberal Party won. And every time the National Party swoop in with their 13 seats nationally, 13 to 14 seats nationally, and the Greens do better at the primary vote than the National Party, and they come out with maybe no seats. You don't get a lot of the right complaining about this, but suddenly it's turned on them, and One Nation don't get any seats. Or maybe there might be 1 or 2. Last I heard that there were a couple seats where they might win. It's still not clear yet. So they did do very well, and the seats that they haven't won yet are very close. So that's something to consider too. Again, I'm just looking at this purely from numbers. I'm not endorsing one nation policy at all. I think they are a sham party with very bad and destructive policies. But when we're looking at it as psephologists, the numbers are all that really matters. The policy analysis can come later.
I didn't actually know that I was a psephologist, but I'll wear that badge very proudly. But it also, I think it's a question about whether we are looking at the failure of the electoral system or whether it's just a case of misunderstanding how the preferencing system actually works. But if people want to have the debate about the electoral system not being representative, well, I think that's good. I think we actually should reform the system to get more representation from the minor parties. But this is exactly how this system is meant to work at the moment. I don't fully agree with it. So you either work towards changing the system, and that's a long-term process, or you start understanding how the current system works in the short term, and you're working within the way that the parameters are currently working. So in each seat, preferential voting is actually very fair, but I think collectively it's not working out to be fair or representative. And I guess that's why we have the Senate, which is far more proportional to balance everything out. But because the voting patterns have changed, and there's more political participants out there, even the ones that we don't like, well, I think there probably is a good case to change the overall system. And in countries like New Zealand and Germany, well, they use proportional systems, mixed member parliaments. We've also got this in Tasmania and the ACT. That's actually a better reflection of the vote. And maybe it's time that Australia seriously considered it for federal politics. And you referred to this before, David. The point is that the Greens have had to live with this imbalance for decades and never seriously made a push to change it. But now that the centre-right is experiencing the same thing, suddenly it's this big crisis. But the upshot is that voting in the lower house in Australia, you don't get necessarily the rewards for the amount of votes that you receive, but where those actually votes are received, and that's in the seats. And I think that's what the big difference is.
Yeah, Australia has a very good electoral system, and it's run very well. We're very lucky that we've had an an electoral commission that resisted the reforms that certain governments wanted to put through. And the AEC is used all around the world because it knows how to distribute this stuff fairly and accurately. And sure, there's anomalies and there's mistakes and there's things but that's because all human systems have that. And there's not that many. If anyone here is working for the AEC who's listening to us, you are appreciated and keep up the good work. I think moving to MMR, the risk is that we are currently one of the most over-governed countries in the world. And I don't want to come across as a conspiracy lizard person, sovereign citizen type here. But we have 152 representatives in the lower house, another 76 in the upper house, plus state government, plus local governments and territories. We don't lack for representation. One of the big issues with MMR is we're adding another 2 or 3 members to each. Do we expand the boundaries of the seats, thereby not really solving the problem? Or do we accept that we've got to have double the number of members of parliament in the lower house? And then how does that affect the Senate? Do we then have to knock the Senate up? And the Senate has worked fairly well over the last 120 years with people from the same state representing totally different parties. And so, if we move to there, the only other issue is, of course, by-elections. It's probably easier to keep the standard in the Senate, of course. You don't want to traipse everyone in the state for a replacement. So,
no, but I guess if someone does resign or dies while they're in office, well, then that position would go to the next person in the ballot. Well, that's one way of looking at it.
Yeah, or you could have just a standard election for the vacancy at that sort of local level. It's difficult to drag the whole state in to do that. That's why in the Senate we have that replacement. The party of the person who is made the seat vacant gets to nominate their replacement. And if it's an independent, they get to nominate or the Premier actually does. But that's on advice of the party. And of course,
these are all systems that were developed over 120 years ago, and state governments in Australia have been around for a long time. But I guess overall, like that, they would be the minor details that we'd have to sort out. But anything that relates to getting better representation or a more clearer political representation, I think that would be a good thing.
Yeah. I think the better represented we are, the better we are represented, which sounds redundant, but it's true. If we have 2 members per seat, and for those seats in which there's an opposition member and a government member representing, it means that you can be assured that your side will be heard. But it also means that the parties work a bit better together because you don't want to annoy the person in the same seat as you too much. And certainly there'll be a lot of seats where you'll have 2 Labor Party members, you'll have 2 Liberal Party members, possibly. You'll have 2 independents or 2 Greens members. But there'll be a lot of seats where there'll be a Labor Green. There'll be a lot of seats where there'll be Liberal or Country Party or National Party, One Nation. And that's okay. And there'll be the few that'll be government opposition. And that will force people to work together a bit. The Senate tends to be a much friendlier chamber than the House of Reps because they're all on committees together. They're all representing the same state. So they've got to be a bit more friendly. You've got to get along to get along. And I know that a lot of senators don't actually represent their state as such, but they still congregate together in the same areas, etc. So that might break down the bad oppositions we've had in the past who just say no to everything thinking that's what opposition is. Suddenly you've got to work with people who are probably reasonable too.
One Nation is moving closer to claiming more seats amid the fallout from the election which has stunned Australian politics.
One Nation looks likely to win Nudgery on York Peninsula and is ahead in Hammond, MacKillop and Narunga, all regional electorates.
But I will say to Peter Malinauskas, I'm still in South Australia now. I am leaving tomorrow to go to Canberra to continue my duties. But guess what, mate? I'm leaving you some landmines. They're called One Nation Members of Parliament.
And I found the media narrative around One Nation quite fascinating, but it was also quite predictable. And on one hand, One Nation is a political gimmick pretty much, but they've got that basic populism. And I'm sure that they take themselves seriously, but they haven't really got any serious policy agendas except for things like cutting immigration and making Australia white again, or making it all white again. But on the other hand, well, this is what people have actually voted for in the electorate, and in a democracy, that's all that really matters. And you just don't get ignored because it's inconvenient to us or people who don't like those particular ideologies. And it's a little bit like fascism and Zionism. You have to argue the case against what this is or what people are presenting. And maybe that's what hasn't happened in this sort of situation. But the media has been pushing Pauline Hanson for many years, and maybe this is the end result of this. But in practical terms, like, it still gets back to that one thing, winning 1 or 2 seats. That's not such a big deal. That's not exactly a political earthquake that the media keeps talking about as far as seats won. It might be as far as the primary vote is concerned, and I'll accept that it's a change in voting patterns, but it's also a pattern that the media has helped to create. And people like Pauline Hanson and Barnaby Joyce, well, they just haven't appeared out of nowhere. They've been amplified, they've been normalised, and in many cases actively promoted across mainstream media outlets for many years. And we have to remember that since Pauline Hanson appeared on the scene all the way back in 1996, she's actually been out of politics for most of that time. And even when she wasn't a member of Parliament or a senator, the media, the Sunrise on 7 West media or Channel 9 especially, well, they've played a big role in pushing her agenda. And with the South Australian election, I guess we had the double whammy, the media darling Pauline Hanson on one side and then the train wreck of the Liberal Party on the other side. So who's got time to look at who won the election when you've got all this other chaos going on around you?
Yeah, if you've watched the Working Dog program Frontline recently, it has lasted much better than it should have. It's 30 years old now, I think. And it still is how current affairs works, more or less. Some of it's softened a little bit. They're not quite as overtly sexist as they were or overtly racist as they were. But they interviewed Cheryl Curnow on it, but they also interviewed Pauline Hanson. And it's a very good episode. It held the media to account. He asks her, are you xenophobic? And she says, please explain, and he can't explain it, which was what I noticed at the time too. It's all right to point out somebody else's illiteracy, but make sure you know the meaning of the word. But she has that remarkable survivability that really comes from having a very soft press. A press that didn't laugh her out of existence when she suggested a 1% tax on each part of the car manufacturing, which would have made cars something like $3 million each. When that doesn't react in horror, that calls it, oh, this is what we're all thinking. When she says things like autistic kids shouldn't be allowed in mainstream classes. They're too disruptive. All of them, apparently. And of course, when she says hideously racist things, and the most recent one being good Muslims.
Or there not being any good Muslims.
Not being any good Muslims. What does that mean? And then how does that gel with our relationship with Indonesia, which is often frosty and fractious? If she got into any real influence, Australian Foreign Affairs would have to work extremely hard to assure the biggest Muslim nation in the world, which is Indonesia, that she didn't mean it, or that her views are not held by most Australians, or that it was just political rhetoric, or what have you. It's, any defence I give or any argument I give in favour of the system is by no means an endorsement of one nation. If you're thinking of voting for one nation, don't. It gives you cancer. And I can say that because that's the level of evidence that they use.
And a lot of people have been asking us, and we do like to be asked all of these questions, and we've got all the answers. I'm not sure if they're right, but we do have answers. But the question is, what does this one nation vote actually mean? Is it this ideological shift for the entire electorate or the community? Is it a shift to the right or a protest vote? What exactly is it? But I think when you look at it closely, it's probably a mixture of everything. It's anti-establishment, there's a backlash against cost of living pressure, there's a deep distrust of the major parties as well. There's a bit of anti-immigration feeling there as well, even though the state governments can't actually do anything about immigration levels. There's a bit of sovereign citizen vibe going on there as well. But overall, I just don't think that this is a shift to the right. I think it's a shift within the right itself, because it's pretty much a shifting of the deck chairs, David. And I don't want to bring up that Titanic analogy, but Pauline Hanson was originally from the Liberal Party when she first came into Parliament all those years ago. Corey Bernardi, he's actually the leader of One Nation in South Australia. He used to be in the Liberal Party. Barnaby Joyce, he used to be in the National Party. So I think that's what has changed. These people were part of the coalition at one time in their political career, or initially in their political career. They've shifted over to One Nation, and that vote has shifted with them. And I think that explains some of the increase in the primary vote for One Nation. These people have come over from the Liberal Party or the National Party, and whatever we might think of the Liberal Party, there's a veneer of respectability within the electorate for that party. And if it's former members, or if a member of the Liberal Party or National Party, if they join up with One Nation, that gives the One Nation Party a veneer of respectability.
I think what's happened is that the Liberal Party, particularly in South Australia, particularly in Western Australia, particularly in Victoria, and looks like New South Wales, has fractured so much that it's losing voters until an alternative is sorted out, whether through a brand new leadership with policies that do actually resonate with the electorate, or a brand new party. I think we're finding that some voters who would have voted Liberal have gone to the Greens. Some have gone to One Nation. Now, there's a spread there. They get 22% of the vote, apparently, and they get 1, maybe 2 seats. And this is the same issue that the Greens face. The Greens are in a little bit better of a position, I think, because they do have a rural vote and an urban vote, whereas One Nation, you won't get a significant One Nation vote south of Turramurra, east of Emu Plains, north of Wollongong in New South Wales, and Melbourne's, Perth, Adelaide's the same. They're just not appealing to the urban voters. Queensland's a bit different. And again, not because Queensland is a whole bunch of rednecks. It has managed to sort out its centre-right issue by merging the two parties. And they got a bit lucky in that they were able to organise properly when the Labor Party ran out of steam. The Labor Party's is running out of steam in Victoria, but I don't know what's going to happen there. The Liberal Party in New South Wales isn't running out of steam, but it's not working terribly well. They got rid of the leader, Speakman. But we've got a problem in that the biggest voting bloc in Australia isn't represented across, which is the urban voting bloc, isn't represented across the full political spectrum, or at least not effectively. Now, when I say that, I'm fully aware that we have the teal candidates and the pre-teal candidates. It starts with Rebecca Sharkey and Helen Haynes and Zali Steggall, who weren't teal exactly, but got in for the same reason that the later teal candidates did. And, you know, that's a good thing. I think it's very possible that we are heading into a very Italian situation where we will have lots of minor parties who are really independents forming these huge unwieldy coalitions for a while. I think I'm not saying that's definitely what's going to happen, but I think that's well within the realms of possibility.
Oh, but I guess going back to that issue of the preferencing system, because that seems to be the theme of today, you know, that preferencing system is so unfair because we didn't win sort of thing. And as we discussed before, I think it is a fair system, but that doesn't mean that it shouldn't be reformed. And we wrote a book about all of this, David, Fixing Australian Politics. And I mention that because every time I mention it, we get a couple of sales during the week. So that's the book, Fixing Australian Politics. But
it's a good book. And while you're there, buy a couple of others. They're all good books.
Of course they are. And I did apply some figures based on this mixed member system, such as the one that exists in New Zealand. Had a little bit of spare time during the week, and it is a little bit rough, but at the state level, and all things being equal, but if MMP or MMR existed in South Australia on Saturday night, all things being equal, Labor would have won 20 seats, One Nation around 10 seats, Liberals 8, Greens around 5 seats, Independents 5. So that would have been a parliament that more closely represents how people voted. So the Labor Party would still win the election, but it would have to form a coalition with the South Australian Greens and maybe one or two of the independents. But at the federal level, because I had a little bit more spare time than I expected, David, and I had a bit more data to work with from the 2025 federal election, and I haven't factored in the Senate vote. But at the federal election, and again, all things being equal, Labor still wins the election if we have MMP, MMR. Labor still wins the election, but not as comfortably. It gets around 61 seats. Liberals and LNP get around 49 seats. Nationals have 7 seats. The Greens win 22 seats, and One Nation gets 11 seats. And once again, Labor would have to form a coalition with the Australian Greens to govern. And wouldn't Anthony Albanese love that? He could call them the Greens political party all day long. But I think this is just a far more representative government. It might not be as stable, but I think it would result in better government. So if you've got a Labor-Greens coalition, Labor wants to join the war with the United States and Israel against Iran, the Australian Greens would say, no, we want to have a parliamentary vote on that before we proceed. Renewable energy superpower that Anthony Albanese keeps talking about but hasn't actually delivered, well, the Australian Greens force him to actually do it. Housing policy, implement that instead of talking about it and arguing with us. Negative gearing changes, implement that too. Now, generally, I don't think very much of the Liberal Party. I think that's pretty obvious, and I think even less of One Nation. But the point is that if two parties combined are pulling in 41% of the primary vote and only getting around 10% of the seats, that's not a healthy democracy. And in the same way, if Labor and the Australian Greens collectively received around 46% of the primary vote, which is what they received at the 2025 federal election, and they only won 10% of the seats, well, I'd be pretty pissed off about that. So sure, we can say that this is how the system works at the moment, but it might not be working well enough.
We can also look at Labor's lower primary vote as a thing too. Yes, Labor stormed through, and it was an extraordinary victory from Peter Malinauskas, but it's not that high a primary vote.
Yeah, that's right. Well, he got 37% of the vote, and 10 years ago, the argument used to be, well, you're not going to win an election unless you've got a 4 in front of your primary vote. Now you're getting these massive majorities with 37% of the vote.
As the price of fuel goes up, the value of a vote goes down. I think when you look at the raw figures, and this is something that the South Australian government needs to, I think, be wary of. It's not that well a seat they were able to manipulate the preferences very artfully, which is what Anthony Albanese's Labor Party and Federal was able to do. They didn't get that high a vote either, but they got everybody voted for who they wanted and said, if they can't get in, we'll vote for Labor. And this is one of the big existential problems of the Liberal Party. People have stopped thinking that, I'm going to vote for my preferred candidate, but if they don't get in, I'll be happy with the Liberal Party getting in. It's not happening on either side, and in fact, it's totally collapsed on the Liberal side. It hasn't collapsed yet on the Labor side. But if I was Labor, normally we're giving free advice to the Liberal Party. They didn't take any of it, and look at what happened. But if I was Labor, I would be looking at how do we improve our primary vote. Labor, I think, has some structural problems that aren't apparent widely yet, but they're there if you look. I think it's possible we're heading to another Labor split, but not yet. While they're winning, and it doesn't matter how they're winning, I think it was Mark Latham who said you only need one vote to win. Labor is in a good position. When they start losing, we might start to, we might start to see the split, as we've seen with the Liberal Party. They were all very united and strong and powerful till the losses started coming through, and then the cracks started to show much more visibly.
Oh, well, once you get those cracks happening in the veneer, that's when you start getting all those defections. But are we likely to start seeing more defections to One Nation from the Liberal Party and from the National Party? I don't think anyone from the Labor Party is going to defect over to One Nation, although that's exactly what Mark Latham did. And this idea of defecting to One Nation, it might have seemed a bit of a far-fetched idea about a year ago, but it's not so ridiculous today because we're actually seeing it happen in front of us. And there are a lot of hardline MPs and senators within the Liberal Party, and because the Liberal Party is falling apart, One Nation is starting to look more like a natural fit for some of these people. We mentioned Corey Bernardi before. He was from the Liberal Party. Senator Alex Antich, he's within the Liberal Party at the moment. For how long, we don't know, but he's hard right or far right. And I can easily see him or imagine him in the One Nation chamber, and it's probably the bigger question about what actually is the Liberal Party these days. And since the Howard era, it's been more or less the Conservative Party, and it's become so conservative that it's destroyed itself. And Tony Barry from Breadbridge Research, he called the Liberal Party of today the nasty party, and that idea of Menzies liberalism, that's been flushed down the drain, and it was flushed down the drain such a long time ago.
77 is the key year in Australia. Bill Hayden becoming leader of the Labor Party with his smaller liberal approach to economics, and John Howard being appointed treasurer. That's where the shift really starts. And Gough Whitlam points the way in many ways. He starts knocking tariffs off things and things like that. But it was really when Hayden becomes leader of the party, it allows for Bob Hawke and Paul Keating to come through. When Howard becomes leader of the party, it starts a 15-year civil war, really, maybe a bit longer, about 15 years, between the Deaconite soul of the Liberal Party, the Reedite soul, or really between the Keynesians and the Neolibs, and which the Neolibs win. But they're now starting to lose because that philosophy is dying. My friend Andrew Shields has pointed out that it was the oil shocks of the 1970s that opened the door to neoliberalism. Looks like it'll be the oil shock of 2026 that'll finish it off. And I thought that was I'd like to take credit for it myself, but he might be listening, so I better credit him properly. And that's part of the thing, that the philosophy that the Liberal Party built itself under from 77 has been shown to have failed. And this is what is leading to its electoral collapse. New South Wales is going to be very interesting because you have a not very popular Labor Party, although it's leading in the polls, let's be fair, and a fragmenting Liberal Party. Victoria is going to be interesting. You've got a very tired Labor Party. And I don't know that anyone would really seriously hold Jacinta Allen to account, having followed one of the most all-time popular premiers ever into a fourth election. It's not likely she'd be expected to win. But given the disaster that is the Victorian Liberal Party, she might have to do it as a minority government. She just might do it. Under normal circumstances, we'd be saying, yeah, they probably can't. They've lost a lot of talent. They've got to rebuild the talent. There's a lot of good people in the party, blah, 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 but they're not ready. They're tired. They're running out of ideas. They need to go into opposition and reset. But in this case, you're not going to get a one nation government in Victoria. You're just not. Probably you might get one in Western Australia. You might get one in Queensland. You might, but they're not likely either.
Well, I guess the other point is that, we're speculating about elections in the future, but we've just had this one in South Australia, and election results do give you clear data and information about how to proceed with all of this. So you don't really have to speculate about these things too much. You now got the facts on the ground, as they like to say. But you can see a natural formation happening here. Liberal moderates, and we're talking federally, but Liberal moderates, maybe the Teals. Then on the other side, if you strip away all of the party branding and all that sort of stuff and the fact that some of these are independents or whatever, if you take all of that away, you can see the Liberal moderates and maybe the Teals on one side. And then on the other side, there's the conservative rump of the Liberal Party aligning with the Nationals, Katter, Australia Party, One Nation. But the problem is that there just isn't enough of them, David. So if they ever wanted to form government, they would still have to form a coalition amongst themselves. And then we're back to where we first started. Another centre-right coalition with the same faces, probably wearing different badges. And, I don't want to make this all sound like a game of Survivor, but there might be a few more splits and mergers that are going to happen if the overall centre-right wants to survive. Otherwise, it's just going to be a long, long time in opposition for them.
They really purged the moderates, and now they're fighting on the far right, which is insane. The Liberal Party, of course, should be looking at the centre. You got to govern for the centre. You can't govern from the fringes. And every time One Nation says something outrageous, the Liberal Party tries to outdo it, it seems. Now, I will be fair, Matt Canavan did heavily criticise Pauline Hanson's racism. So maybe there's hope. And the hope is from the National Party, still the most stable, despite the chaos it's had. It's still the only seat it lost in the last federal election went to an ex-national, Andrew G. So they're not as in dire straits as the Liberal Party is, and as the Labor Party will be when they lose, as inevitably at some point in the future they will. Having said that, anything can and does and will happen. And yet predicting the future in Australian politics is really throwing a dice and hoping that the numbers you guessed, except it's 100-side dice and there's 4 of them and you've got to get the exact right 4 numbers to get anywhere.
For sure. But all of the attention today has been on the centre-right, and people might be wondering, hang on, where's the centre-left or the progressive content? And we'll get onto that soon. But the attention on the centre-right is happening because that's where all the chaos is. But the real question is, and you alluded to this before, David, could the same thing happen to the centre-left or the progressive side of politics? I won't call it centre-left, it's more centrist than centre-left, but the progressive side of politics or the less conservative side of politics. And right now, right at this very moment, it seems very unlikely because at the moment, Labor is the dominant political party. It's probably going through its most dominant period in its history, like federally and across most states of Australia, Western Australia, South Australia, New South Wales, Victoria, although Victoria not such a great position as you explained before, David, the ACT, and all of these jurisdictions are in a real position of real strength. And when you're in this sort of position, well, political parties, they don't go out looking for new parties or try and invent their political identity. And I can't imagine Anthony Albanese and the Labor Party holding all of those 94 seats in the lower house and then thinking, oh, hang on, we better set up an alliance with the Australian Greens or the Greens political party who just hold the one seat. Well, that's just not going to happen. But as you explained before, David, politics does move very quickly. And just 4 years ago, 2022, 4 years ago, the coalition held power federally. They were in government in New South Wales, in South Australia. They looked fairly entrenched, and maybe the coalition federally was a little bit wobbly at that time, but now they're a complete mess. So 4 years into the future, could the Labor Party face the same fate, say in 2030 or 2031? It is very unlikely at this stage. But 4 years ago, when the Liberal Party was in office, still in office federally and in South Australia, I don't think anyone would have predicted that the coalition would only have 42 seats in Parliament 4 years later, and 4 years later just poll 19% of the primary vote in South Australia and would be beaten by One Nation in the primary vote. So I don't see it happening. Well, it's not going to happen while Labor is in office, but if you get some kind of breakaway faction from the Labor Party, it did happen in the 1950s, and sure, they were in opposition when it happened, or if you get some left-wing populist movement tapping into economic frustration, climate change issues, inequality, and those issues that are pissing off the centre-right at the moment, there's a lot of crossover into progressive movements as well. But as you suggested, David, politics never stands still. So it's not so obvious now, but I feel that the issues that have crumbled the Liberal Party, well, they could bleed over to the Labor Party. Maybe not right now, or definitely not right now, because the conditions for the Labor Party are not there as we speak, but the conditions might appear there later on and maybe not so far away.
Archie Cameron, the National or the Country Party Speaker of the House for many years, pointed out in politics, you cock of the walk one day and you feather duster the next. Harold Macmillan in British politics, a week is a long time in politics. The underlying fracture in the Labor Party is not really spoken openly, but it's there, and that is, of course, the position you hold on Palestine. And I think that's what the nearest precedent I can think of is the Labor generally splits over religion. 1931 seems to be a separate, is the one time Labor splits, that it wasn't religion at the core, because the Catholic Joe Lyons leaves the party, which is being led by the Catholic Jim Scullin. But the 1918 split or 1917 split over conscription was really over Catholic versus Protestants. The Protestants tended to be in favour of conscription. The Catholics tended to be against it. And that's because a lot of Catholics were working class and they knew where the conscripted troops would come from. It's a little bit more complex than that, but that's a big reason. 1956, the right Catholic faction splits and forms the Democratic Labor Party because they're very worried about communist influence in the Labor Party. Not all Catholics go, of course. Arthur Colwell famously stays thinking that he can fix it from within. He wasn't the only one, but Vince Gare and all of those leave to really just fill seats in the Senate till 1975 or whenever, when they finally get eased out. They have the odd resurgence every now and then, but they were basically seat warmers, the DLP. But nonetheless, the split was real and feelings were high, feelings were passionate. The split now over religion is your view on Palestine. Do you think Israel has a point, or do you not think Israel has a point? Labor Party official policy is to recognise Palestine, which they did. Let's not ignore facts that might kick into my argument a bit. But very powerful Labor figures are very much pro-Israel and very much pro-Zionist. This is what I think will be the underlying split in the Labor Party once they lose power. At the moment, everyone's friends because they're powerful, because they're in government, because they're doing very well. One of the things, too, that Labor has that Morrison and Abbott and really Turnbull never really had was that it's a fairly competent ministry at the federal level. We haven't had many scandals. We haven't had many issues with spending and poor policy, and that we've had a few. They haven't been an absolutely perfect government, but the Australian electorate likes competence and stability, and Labor has been able to give that mostly. Again, not to say that they've been this perfect party of government. We're living in a Australian utopia.
So basically, the split in the Labor Party isn't going to happen next week. That's what you're telling us.
I don't think so. Although if things expand in the Middle East, who knows? But at the moment, everyone knows that you get better paid when you're a government backbencher. You get better paid when you're a government minister. You can actually, and probably, and I'll be fair, you can do a lot more in government than from outside government.
Oh, for sure. The other thing is that those 94 seats that the Labor Party holds at the moment, they hold those until 2028 as well. That's another 2 years. So things can change quite dramatically within 2 years. All of this might settle down, it might increase. We just never know. But the big point is that politics is a moving feast. We just never know when things are going to change on the horizon, when things look all rosy and you look at the horizon and think, oh, that's not going to change or nothing different is going to happen, then it all changes when you least expect it.
Yeah, it's insane. It's, as I said, it's throwing 400, trying to predict it, it's throwing 400-sided dice and having to get the right numbers in the right order. It happens occasionally, but not as often as you'd think.
That's it for this episode of New Politics. Thanks for listening in. And if you value independent journalism without the influence of corporate backing, join New Politics at newpolitics.com.au and support us directly. It's just $5 per month, and we always try to keep it very simple. If you like what we do, please send some support our way. It keeps our commitment to independent journalism ticking along. I'm Eddie Djokovic. Thanks for listening in, and it's goodbye to our listeners.
I'm David Lewis. We'll see you next time.